Discover the career of your dreams. Learn how to get your foot in the door, stand out, and create the life you desire. This is our time. This is our adventure. I'm Siobhan Colleen. This is Industry Explorers. This is Caitlin Busscher. So before we jump into that risk, I want to backtrack a little and ask you about the Disney Ambassador Program. Can you talk about like a project in the life of a Disney ambassador? Like, what does that even mean? What is that like?
The Disney Ambassador Program is, it's an amazing program. It spans all the parks across the globe. And every day obviously looks different and each term looks different. So what the current ambassador teams are doing now might look completely different from what we were doing because it's really dependent on the team and the time and what the company needs during that time. So I actually wrote an article about this for just this reason, because there's so many things that go into the ambassador program, and I lived my life by our Outlook calendar. So we did a lot of engagement with cast members. Again, this goes back to the heart of I love people. So, and my counterpart did as well. And we made that a bit more of we wanted that to be our focus, is meeting as many cast members as possible. It was 75,000 people at the time, and there's 2 of us. So we were like, we just want to meet and thank and listen to the stories of as many people as possible. And again, he had a marketing background, I had a communications background. So those were our strengths, and we leaned into that. So we, like many ambassadors do, we did a ton of events, a lot of cast member recognition events, media events where we would be spokespeople on behalf of the company and deliver talking points for radio or television. We did a lot of role shadows. So during our time, we would get into costume and be trained by the cast members that make the magic. And we role shadowed, I think, just about every job on property.
Did you role shadow anything in technical services?
We did the tax team, and we did some of the behind the scenes. We did like WDW Today, we did technicians, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We did a few behind the scenes of technicians. We got to do some experience at different stages, like Indiana Jones, Voyage of the Little Mermaid, a lot of the studios shows, because they have a lot of really cool behind the scenes experiences. So yeah, pretty much like, especially entertainment, because I was a former costuming manager and my counterpart, Nathaniel Palma, was a former performer. So together we loved everybody, obviously, but we had a special place in our heart for entertainment.
That's my background. I was in tech services over in Anaheim, so that has a special place in my heart as well, and I love that you got to experience that. But that's really cool. You got to role shadow and hear a lot of different stories. So when you're not speaking to the media, is it a role where you are boosting morale for the company?
Definitely. We'd go to a lot of cast recognition events. If cast members were rewarded for saving somebody's life or reaching zero, net waste in their team, we would go and be a part of that as well, as along with the executives. The cast member milestone events, like the huge party they throw for people celebrating, years of service, we would go and celebrate there. One of my favorite events that I usually share is at Disney's Animal Kingdom Lodge. And prior to the pandemic, they had cultural representatives that would come from, in this particular instance, all over Africa to add a level of authenticity and to share their stories and their culture. And I have a very special place in my heart for the whole continent of Africa. And I loved going to they would have graduations at the end of their term before they went back home to take all of the learnings in the hospitality industry they learned at Disney and bring it home and apply it in their own industries. And they would have a ceremony where each country had their flag, and the people representing that country would come up together and they would sing their national anthem. And if there was only one person representing the country, the rest of the graduates would gather behind them to support them. And I just cried every single time, because it was so many things that I loved. It was simple, but it was in the lobby so guests could see it, and guests that had been DVC members had come multiple times would hug certain representatives that were going home. Like, it was just like the epitome of, culture and Disney magic and the love. And it was beautiful. So that was just one of the many types of things that we were very honored and humbled to be a part of during our term.
That really is beautiful. When you were speaking to the media, what were some of the talking points that you would deliver? And I understand this might vary between who's interviewing you, whether it's for radio or broadcast. I want to hear it all.
When we spoke with media, it was usually in conjunction with something exciting happening at Disney. So it was always really fun because we were unveiling, a renovation at a resort. The opening or the renaming of downtown Disney to Disney Springs. We had Disney's Animal Kingdom After Dark when all of the enhancements were added. So it was always all of the really fun stuff that we got to share. So the talking points themselves are always, part of whatever the celebration was. Frozen, our Frozen Summer of Fun celebration. That was a good one. That was probably one of my favorite interviews. It was a radio drive. So sometimes there was television and radio, and sometimes it was just radio. And they'd set up all these tables, and you could pretty much just go boom, boom, boom down the line speaking to different radio stations. And I liked radio in particular because you can be a bit more verbose and you can have a little bit more fun. It's not as sound bitey as TV. So it was really fun to get to know the DJs and joke around with them. So one of my favorites was about Frozen Summer of Fun because this particular DJ was just really into Sven and they really loved Frozen. And so it made it so much fun to talk about the event because it didn't feel like I was delivering talking points. I felt like I was talking to a fellow Disney fanatic like myself. And yes, working in the talking points of like, oh, well, Sven's not here, but, who is here? Olaf, and you can see him, down at the theater for the Frozen sing-along celebration. Like,
I love the way you weave the talking points into the conversation.
Exactly. So it doesn't feel like I'm a robot delivering talking points I was told to tell you. It felt like it was fun. It was probably, hopefully more fun for the listeners as well.
Oh gosh, absolutely. Did you have any cringe-worthy moments with a host, whether it was like an embarrassing moment for you or the host did or said something that made you go, I wish you didn't ask that, or I wish you didn't ask it that way? Did you ever have a moment like that?
I'm trying to think of anything that was good. I'm sure I've had plenty of embarrassing moments.
As a host of a podcast and a live stream, I would like to know because I want to know what not to do.
I think for the most part, everybody was so great. Everyone was really happy to be there. So it's not like they were asking anything that would be untoward. I think the only thing that's difficult is people are eager to know what's going on, and they want to be the person that knows and can tell everybody. So there might have been a couple of times people really wanted to press like, oh, but do you know when it's opening? Do you know the date? But do you really know the date? And of course, I'm like, well, I think it's going to be officially announced through an official channel before it's announced by someone else. I appreciated their enthusiasm and wanting to break the story, but I always felt bad I couldn't give them what they wanted, but also that was, not my place to break that information. So that was always kind of hard because I didn't want to disappoint anybody, but I had to stay true to what my responsibility was.
That's also a high level of professionalism on your part. How do you handle questions that you don't have answers to?
That's actually a really good question. And we received some really great training at Disney because you always want to be a great representative. And that's true for a large company. It's true when it's just you as an individual. I think it's important to always respond to a question, but it doesn't mean you have to answer. I'm not always obligated to answer someone if, even on social media, if someone's being a little bit of a badger, or I feel like they're not actually seeking to understand or enhance the discussion, and they're instead seeking to be, just kind of poke at things. It's hard to keep professionalism sometimes, and I always want to be kind and thoughtful, and I always want to operate at the highest level of professionalism that I can. So I'll try to respond in a way that doesn't inflate anything anymore. But there is a certain point where I'm okay saying just stepping out of the conversation from a social media perspective. Luckily, like I said, when I was in my previous roles, I didn't have anything that required that, so to speak. Everyone was always a professional, which was great for everyone involved, right? We had a good working relationship. And I think getting to know people and like understanding we both want the same thing. We both want success for whatever the interview is. Like it's a mutually beneficial endeavor. So no one wants to undermine the other person. I think it's always important to remember that as well. Remember to just assume good intent and that you're both on the same team.
Unless you're like being interviewed by someone who is specifically political and on one side or the other, then you're probably going to be asked some pretty controversial questions.
Yes. And in that case, if in those kinds of situations, again, not that I've been in one of those, but that's where there's a team of people usually, this is in any capacity for politicians, for anybody that think ahead, like what could be asked, what is our stance on our belief, and how do we present that in a way that we feel good about. Again, knowing not everyone's always going to agree with you or love everything that you have to say, but can you do it in a way that you at least can be like, I could pass the red face test on this. I realize not everyone's going to agree, but I'm doing it in a way that I think is on brand for me.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're going to bed with yourself and you're the one who's living with yourself. So if you present something, it's got to be in alignment with not just your brand, but yourself as a person, like your personal beliefs, and you got to honor yourself in that way. I think that's really great insight. And you certainly have the skills to do that sort of communication in a political setting. I don't know, is that something that you would want to do?
It's funny. I've thought about it before, very, very like low key, because there's a big part of me. I'm like, I don't know if I could handle all the negative stuff. I feel like that's tough. It's really tough. I take things very, I don't know if I'd be able to, even like one little like comment out of thousands that are positive, but there's one that's like, oh, well, what about this? Even though logically I know like, okay, so you're operating from a very different value set than I am. Fine. We're not going to see eye to eye. It's not a reflection on me as a person, but still it's that one little thing, that one comment that's going to like tease my mind for a long time where I'm like, oh, what? Like, and I sometimes can't let it go. And so I'm trying to get better about that. That's why I think it's important sometimes, again, risk taking, putting out a couple more of my thoughts and ideas, especially when I believe in them so truly, and trying to understand exactly what I've told all of you all so far. I need to take my own advice. Not everyone's going to love everything you say. And as long as you know that you're holding true to your beliefs, you got to be able to let that go. So it's still something I'm working on. It's a very difficult thing to do. So I think for politicians, they have to have some serious support and people pouring into them. Like, don't let this get to you. You're wonderful. I just think it'd be really hard.
I would need constant validation if I were a politician. Constant. And I hear you. That one negative comment on social media is it's hard. But the crazy thing is the person who commented something negative has probably already stopped thinking about whatever they commented on. And you're the one who's just still thinking about it and obsessing over it. And you're letting this troll, or maybe not even a troll, just a person who doesn't even think about it anymore. You're just letting them live in your head rent free. No, I'm with you. That is a skill that you and I both need to learn for ourselves and our own sanity.
Yeah, I don't think that comes naturally to anybody. I do think it's a practiced. It's consistently taking the risk and then learning to build the thick skin you might need and the validation, like, no, like I'm standing by my convictions. And it takes practice. It's not natural.
Tell us about that tech startup, the travel tech startup.
Yes. So it was, it's a really great idea. I'm still good friends with the founders and they're still doing great things. I had to take a little pause during COVID because group travel wasn't really a thing at the time. But it was a great learning experience. Again, going back to that communications theme, I had to learn to speak a completely different language. I came from a place where I talked about pixie dust and the magic. And then I was talking about like group airfare contracts and, materialization rates, and artificial intelligence was thrown in there for a little bit. So I really was learning a completely different industry and a different way to talk. I was learning the language of investors and how do you pitch to somebody and convince them to give you money, and that they should have confidence in you and your idea, and that looks different. That's a different audience. So learning the way to reach that audience versus an audience coming to you for entertainment. So yeah, it was a really, really great learning experience.
Can you expand on that? I know there are a lot of students in high school and college who are very interested in becoming entrepreneurs. So we may have listeners who are very interested in having their own startup or being on a startup team, and they're going to need to know the language of, speaking to directors and investors. Can you expand on that?
Speaking to investors, I don't want to simplify it too much, but it definitely comes down to a certain extent to money. They want to know that you will make a return on their investment. With that being said, investors are still people with emotions, and that means they still respond to storytelling and they still respond to all those persuasive tactics that work in advertising, that work in movies. So I think it's easy to kind of get into like here's all the numbers and the business. But these people are still people. So I think you can still find ways to infuse the emotional element because people are much more likely to make a decision based on emotion than logic. And that's been proven a lot of times. One of the investment decks that we went to, with one of the first ones I saw as a reference was Airbnb's initial investment deck. They did a really great job setting up the flow of what you should talk about first and really setting up the problem first, so people understand what it is you're trying to fix. Because that's another thing when it comes to entrepreneurism, is making sure you have a problem that is an actual problem and that is fixable to scale. So there's lots of great ideas. Doesn't always mean all of them are going to make lots of money. So identify your problem when you're talking to investors. Tell them how this problem is the market and how much it's going to grow, how much money they're going to make, but appeal to them in a way that is that emotional side. Tell a story, give an example.
So my partner and I just watched a documentary. I thought of it when you mentioned that people are more likely to make a decision based on emotions. And if you want to see that in practice, I suggest that you watch WeWork, or The Making and Breaking of a 47 Billion Unicorn. That's all. That's the whole title. I'll repeat the title one more time. This is the all one title. WeWork, or The Making and Breaking of a 47 Billion Unicorn. It's about the company WeWork, and it's about how investors just kept pouring money into them, but they weren't making a return on investment. The company was not making money, so essentially they eventually, I believe, went bankrupt. So it's just the rise and fall of this incredible startup. And, that is a perfect example of making decisions based on emotion and grand promises rather than on numbers. And even then, it seems that they fudged their own or manipulated their numbers when presenting to investors anyway. But great documentary. Highly recommend it.
It also goes to show the power of persuasion and being able to be a good salesperson and to present yourself well. So there's the one end where you just want to prove to them that you can do this and instill confidence, and that's good. And then there's that extreme end, like you mentioned, heck, watch the Fire Festival documentaries where if you have that showmanship and that persuasion, that communicative ability, that's a huge piece in getting people to buy into you and to fork over their paycheck or their checkbook. So again, don't do anything that you're not supposed to, but there is a certain amount of showmanship and persuasive communication and storytelling that you do need to infuse if you want to present to investors.
Do you have any resources that you recommend to people on just storytelling? We'll just start with storytelling.
One book I really enjoyed, it's by Donald Miller. It's called Building a Story Brand. It pretty much breaks down the arc of almost every movie that we love and breaks it down into bite-sized pieces that tells you here's why it works. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is that a lot of brands center themselves as the hero in their story. And you can see this if you go to a website and the about us is like really about us. Like, we were founded in 1950 when blah, blah, blah. As a consumer, like, maybe that's cool to you, but really you're there to see, like, how can you help me solve a problem? And so what Donald Miller talks about is you should be the fairy godmother or the Yoda, and your consumer or your client should be the hero that has a problem to solve, and how are you going to help them do it? So it doesn't sound very mind-blowing, but for me at the time, I was like, whoa. And now I can't not see it when I go to certain websites. And the websites you get frustrated at, where you're like, wait, what are your products? Like, and you can't find what you're looking for. It's probably because they didn't make it with you in mind as the hero of the story.
Yeah, it was. I also enjoyed that book. It was very mind-blowing to me. And I love the analogies that Donald Miller used. I almost said Donald as if like him and I are on first name basis. He doesn't know me at all. Maybe I'll interview him one day. That'd be great.
That'd be amazing.
But he describes like your company essentially needs to be Yoda to Luke Skywalker being your customer or your client, not the other way around. I do really appreciate that analogy. And it's just like, it really solidifies the concept that he's trying to convey. So what other resources or maybe something to consider if someone's trying to be a better storyteller in general?
As you know, you found me on LinkedIn. I'm a huge proponent of LinkedIn for idea sharing. I've found a lot of great storytellers, because you don't have to be making a movie or writing a book or designing a website to be a storyteller. You can be a storyteller right on LinkedIn with just a few paragraphs, and you can connect with people. And to me, being able to tell a story in a very short amount of time or space and connect with people, that's even harder than having the luxury of a whole book or a whole film. So I think it's really good to follow people that you admire on LinkedIn, see how they communicate, how they tell stories that are inspiring. I also love TED Talks. So, finding those opportunities, those are great. And some of those people are definitely experts in their field, but some of them are everyday people that just have an interesting story to tell. I think from a storytelling perspective, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is to always tie it back to your audience at the end. So even if you're telling a story about yourself, how does this benefit your audience? What can they take away from it? And the best storytellers are the ones that tell the story, and at the very end, they give so this is how you can do X, Y, and Z. And this is why I think you are the best at what you do. You always see that tie, that little bow at the end.
Yeah. There is a book, I think it's just called TED Talks, and there's probably something after the colon, but it's all about how to deliver a TED Talk and the different tactics that you can use, or the different strategies for either memorizing or partially memorizing your speech, or different styles that you can go with. So that's a book that I recommend.
Ooh, I'm gonna get that one. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna look up the actual title, and I'll say it in just a moment. What about resources for becoming a better salesperson? What if you're someone, whether you are a high school student, college student, or an adult who's had a whole other career, but now you need to get into sales? Do you recommend any resources for someone wanting to develop those skills?
I'm not sure about resources specifically, but what I will tell you is sales, especially for a salesperson, there might be some numbers involved, but ultimately at the core of it, sales is people skills. It's communication skills, it's persuasion, it's storytelling. So anything you can do to become comfortable telling a story or comfortable talking to people is going to help you. So I would recommend, public speaking is always a good way to go. I'm part of Toastmasters International, and it's a great way to get up in front of people that are supportive and practice impromptu speaking or practice prepared speeches and get feedback on like, oh, you kind of rock back and forth, or you say a lot in your speech. Those are all communication skills that will make you more authentic or believable when you are selling. Another big thing I'd recommend is whatever you're selling, experience it. Go experience it yourself, because then it doesn't feel like you're selling. It just feels like you're talking about it, especially if it's something that you can enjoy. I know at Disney that was huge. I was selling these very high-end packages to people, but it didn't feel like I was like, oh, I'm going to upsell them on this, because I just believed it. I was like, this is so cool. Can I tell you about this new thing we have? Because I just did it last week. And oh my gosh, my husband loved it. We did it for his birthday. And it doesn't, like, I'm not selling. I'm a person talking again to a fellow fanatic.
It sounds like you're speaking to a friend.
Exactly.
Like my mind just went to you and I at like a barbecue, like, hey, how's it going, Caitlin? Hey, Siobhan, what's up? Oh my gosh. Okay, so my husband and I tried this thing. You got to try it too. Like, that's how I felt just now. You made me feel that way.
Well, I'm glad I could make you feel like we're just friends at a barbecue, and I tried this great barbecue sauce that you have to try from. But to your point, it's just natural part of the conversation. If you see anybody that does direct sales, that does it well, because that's not always the case. It shouldn't be like, hey, buy this, buy this. It's like, hey, I happen to love this product and I just want to share it with you because I think you might like it. And that's why, affiliate links and direct sales businesses and influencers, this is why this is blown up, because people trust people that they like, that they respect, that they think are being honest with them and recommending things that they actually believe in. So that's all salesmanship, but it doesn't feel like they're like this old-timey sales guy, like trying to give you something that they're scamming you on. They're just a friend sharing what they love with you. Take it or leave it.
That is amazing. Amazing insight. I hate being a salesperson. But I'm going to listen to this podcast again and again and again, just to like solidify the concepts and the principles that you just shared with us today. So thank you so much for that. Do you want to talk about COVID and what you did? What was that? I know on LinkedIn, you were applying for so many different jobs and you had different interviews and you were posting about it. Talk about that experience.
It's funny because we talk about COVID. Obviously, it was, and it's not exactly over yet. We're seeing the light now. It was such a difficult time for so many people. I never want to minimize that. There were some aspects of it for me that I just tried to find silver linings. And again, I feel privileged that I was able to look for the silver linings. And one of those was really being able to put a pause and slow down for a second and think, what's my next step going to be? I want it to be strategic and I want it to be purposeful. I was fortunate. I didn't have to just run and grab a job to have a job. I had the benefit of time. So I thought about what I valued, where my skill set was. And like you said, I took to LinkedIn. And my initial strategy was really like, there's a lot of people going through the same thing as me. And I love creating content. I love sharing my experiences from a professional development perspective. So maybe there's a way I can help other people like me. And like I said before, you put good out and you get good back. So again, I wasn't being like that old-timey salesperson, like, hey, can someone hire me? Which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not as effective as, hey, everybody, I made this article about upping your resume skills so that maybe you can stand out from the pack. Because I'm doing it. I know a lot of you are doing it. Let's work together. And it was through very honest posts about the difficulties I went through that other people connected with. It was through sharing resources that the community just really was active and supportive at that time. And that's how opportunities came in. People found me and, some people were connecting other people. And that's honestly, I didn't get a single interview from sending a blind resume. Any opportunity to speak with someone, have a conversation, have an interview came from someone finding me on LinkedIn or from a fellow professional connecting me with someone because I saw something on LinkedIn. So again, never underestimate the power of community and networking and making those connections with people. And it can be hard. I know not everybody feels comfortable, connecting with people that way, but it's worth practicing for your own best interest if you can, to try to put yourself out there and make those connections. And then be ready for the opportunity. I made sure my LinkedIn bio was as on point as could be. I Googled best LinkedIn bios to see like what was considered a good, and they were all different. And so I kind of made my own flavor. My resume, I tried to make as on point as possible so that when an opportunity arrived, I was ready for it.
At any point in your career, have you attended any trade shows or conferences?
During my time with the travel technology startup, I went to quite a few conferences. A lot of them were travel-based. A lot of them we were the vendor and we were there trying to meet people, and there were events that you could go to. But a lot of it was people making, reservations to come speak with us. But I always liked, again, it must have been the Disney in me, I liked to leave the booth some time and just walk around the floor and make friends with people because we were like at the same trade show for a few days and we were going to be neighbors. And that to me was, I still have some of those relationships through LinkedIn that we just met at a conference. And and it's like an authentic or somewhat organic relationship. It's not because I need something from them right now. Who knows? Maybe in the future, I want to get back into the travel industry and there'll be a connection. But I think going to those conventions and trade shows, should really be about starting those relationships before you need them, or maybe even if you never need them, but just to make natural relationships. So again, it doesn't feel like you're asking a favor when you need a favor. It just feels like, hey, friend, do you have any insights into this industry or do you have any connections here?
And that's very solid advice. Network before you need something. Because you're right, it should be organic. And going back to our pretend barbecue, it should feel like you're just talking to a friend or colleague. So, okay, going back to COVID, when you kind of blindly sent your resume or cold called people, I don't know that you cold called, but I cold sent resume, coldly reached out. However you would phrase that. You mentioned that opportunity came from professionals that you already had a relationship with, your colleagues and your acquaintances. So what ended up happening? I know you started a new role. Can you share that with our listeners?
Yes. So I've been posting for a while, and a woman that I knew only through LinkedIn reached out to me and she said, hey, I know of a position. They've been looking for someone for a little while and I think you'd be good at it. It might be interesting to you. And of course, I was always open to hear more. I said, that sounds great. Thank you for thinking of me. I'd love to hear more about it. And she sent me the job description and it was a communications job. So I was like, check, that's what I want. But it was funny because I'm going from theme park and hospitality and magic, and it was in agricultural finance. And I was like, well, that's different.
Talk about a blend of industries. It's just, I think, unless you're already surrounded by that kind of world or those worlds, it's not something you think about every day. Like, oh yeah, there's agricultural finance. Of course you need that. Agriculture is a whole industry. Finance is a whole service. Like, of course you need that.
Of course. And that's, again, risk taking and kind of being out of your comfort zone. I was like, I don't really know much about either of these things. So I don't know how this will work, but sure, I'm open to learning about it, hearing about it. We'll see how it goes. And, the interview process was great. And I think what sold me on it was I asked every person, and here's another interview tip I always give people, is to bring good questions and bring real questions, not just like questions to like look good, like I'm prepared for my interview. Here's a question I looked up online. If you're interested in the job, ask questions that's going to tell you if it's the right job for you. So one of the questions I asked everybody I met with was like, so why agriculture? Were you always into agriculture? Like, how did you get here? Because I was still trying to figure out, like, should I be here? And without fail, every person talked about the purpose-driven mentality. Like, they're like, well, what agriculture does is so important for our country. And it's so important. People need to eat, and that's what we support. And that really set a light bulb off for me. And I was like, this feels like that same purpose-driven culture that happened at Disney, that passion, that we're doing this for people and to make people's lives better or easier. And that's something I could connect with. I'm like, now I get it. Now I get how I can fit into this. And honestly, that's what got me totally on board. And I was like, I want this job. Now I am excited about this. Whereas before I was a little trepidatious. So, so now I'm a communications manager. So check, doing exactly what I've wanted to be doing. I'm doing internal and external communications strategy for an industry that's really, really important and meaningful and needs our help. It's not an easy job. So it's something I can be proud of doing every day.
I also love that your interview question was, you managed to make it very personal to every single individual that you were asking that question. Why agriculture? What got you in this position? That's very personal, and you're never going to get the same answer. It's not what are your projected quarterly earnings in, It's nothing like that. Or I think, what is the biggest challenge of this role? I always think that's a good question, but it's also a very common question. So I think your question is a great way to personalize it and to make you stand out as a candidate. So thank you for dropping that insight with our industry explorers today. And as we wrap up this interview, is there anything else that you want me to ask you? Is there anything else about your career that you want to bring up and talk about?
I would just say, looking for that right job, it's a journey. I feel like I've kissed a lot of frogs on my career journey, but I'm thankful for all of them. I've learned something about myself every step of the way, and it wasn't because those jobs weren't great. It's just finding that right fit. And I think another piece of advice I usually give, people either starting out in their careers or just looking to make a transition, is that I don't always think there's such a thing as a dream job. And I actually wrote an article about this because I think it is helpful to alleviate some of the pressure we put on ourselves to gain all of our fulfillment from our 9-to-5, which is a stretch to begin with. It's not a luxury everybody has to chase a dream job, and it can leave us feeling a little bit, underwhelmed. It puts a lot of pressure on our employers too, that they should provide this like magical, perfect, super exciting job. I think you need to find out what you value and what matters to you in your life and how your job can complement that and fit into that. So as you can tell, I'm not a Broadway performer right now. I am not in a Disney parade. I still love those things, but I find ways to do my passions on the side. And I do love what I'm doing now because it's using my skill set. Would I have said back in the day this was my dream job? I would never have labeled it that. So I probably would not have included it in my purview. So I would have limited myself. So I think shed the idea of a dream job because it can really limit you, and follow your path based on, what you're good at, what's available, and what's right in that moment for you.
Absolutely gorgeous. I love it. And I love that we get to end on that note. I'm going to leave a link to that article that you wrote. There's no such thing as a dream job. And, what I gather from listening to you through this whole interview is that you highly value purpose-driven company culture. There's got to be, it's like you have to work for a company that is contributing to the greater good of the world. And I admire that about you, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. Thank you so much for dropping your stories and your insight. I hope the explorers who are listening enjoyed it. And if you're considering a degree in communications or you're thinking about going into public speaking, hopefully today's episode really helps you out. And with that, explorers, I will see you guys on our next adventure. Take care. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to give us a rating and a review. Share your favorite industry insight on your social media pages, and be sure to tag @IndustryExplorers. For more Industry Explorers goodies, go to youcanfollow.me/Industry Explorers. That's youcanfollow.me/Industry Explorers.